So we're playing with the lighting a little bit. What do we think? I have to film after my daughter goes to bed, so it's like evening and the lighting outside is going to be inconsistent. So I thought we'd play around a little bit and hopefully I can film at night. All right, let's talk about The Nun 2. Now, obviously, I have decided to review the remaining horror movies for the rest of the year, despite the writer's strike still ongoing. I do stand with the writers and actors and everyone affected by the strike. However, I need to make a living. And yes, there are plenty of ideas that I have as far as content I could film, and I do have a lot coming up, especially for Halloween season. But I wanted to talk about the rest of the horror movies for this year because this is my channel. What my channel is all about is reviewing movies. So let's talk about The Nun. Although I'm not gonna, it's not a problem for the writer's strike because I'm not promoting The Nun 2 in this case. In fact, I'm doing kind of the opposite. So I feel a little bit better about that. After the events of the first film, the said powerful evil now begins to spread in 1956 throughout a town in France as word gets out that a priest has been violently murdered. Sister Irene begins to investigate the murder only to find a demon behind it, the same evil that terrorized her before, Valak, whom she once again soon comes to encounter. Now, when I ranked and reviewed all of the movies within the Conjuring universe, I will link that video up here and down below in case you're interested in my thoughts on the entire franchise. I ranked The Nun last. So that tells you how excited I was for The Nun 2. I still stand by that. I'm not a fan of The Nun, now movies, plural. It's not my favorite spin-off from the franchise. To me, I think that The Nun movies, plural, feel like cheap cash grabs to me. They're not the greatest horror movies in the world. They feel a little cheap. I'm gonna be right up front with you right now that I'm kind of harsh in this video when I wrote my review. I'm sorry. I am a little harsh on this movie. So if you loved it, this is not the review for you unless you want to know why I didn't like it. These are just not my kind of movies despite them being supernatural movies. Supernatural horror is like my favorite subgenre of horror movies. I mean, The Ring is my favorite movie for a reason. The Blair Witch Project, like these are my favorite horror movies and they are supernatural. So you'd think I'd be really into The Nun. I love the Conjuring movies, the first two anyway. Not into The Nun. And as much as I wanted a Valak movie, like when they first announced that we were getting kind of a Valak backstory and more of The Nun, I was really excited. I even loved that it was a period piece, and that made me even more excited because we got to know the origins a little bit more. But then I almost feel like The Nun movies are like shoehorned into the franchise and they don't really feel like they fit. Or it's kind of a stretch, how they fit into the franchise. And yes, Valak is a main horror element in The Conjuring, sure. It fits in that regard that it's the same demon. But as far as like the story goes, it just feels like forced in there and I'm not a fan. Now, The Nun 2 is directed by Michael Chavez, who actually is not my least favorite director in the franchise. So he actually directed The Curse of La Llorona as well, and if you remember, I gave that one a positive review, which is probably going to discredit this whole review right here and now because The Curse of La Llorona, I tried really hard to say it every single time. Anyway, that movie is not well loved in this franchise. Let me see what it's ranked actually, because I looked at the Nun movies today and I'm just curious of how this one is rated on Rotten. Oh, it's really bad. It's rated really bad. So it's got a 28 from critics, 35% from audiences. Wow. I'm not surprised, honestly, because people don't like that one. I like it. Okay. The first Nun is at 24 and 35, so we're okay. Anyway, Michael Chavez directed The Nun 2 as well. Corin Hardy directed the first Nun movie. What else has he done? Some things I have not seen. So that explains it a little bit, how what I'm gonna say is The Nun 2 is better than The Nun. I liked it more than the first one. I didn't love it. I'm gonna give it like a 2 out of 5. Didn't love it, and we'll get into why in a second. But that makes sense because Michael Chavez did The Curse of La Llorona, and I liked that one a little bit. It wasn't like the greatest in the franchise by any means. And again, that one feels really shoehorned into the franchise. It's hardly in it, if you ask me. But it wasn't bad. And I guess that That's going to make me lose some credibility to some of the viewers out there watching this review and being like, how do you like that movie and not The Nun? I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't think it's as bad as everyone made it out to be. But then again, he made the second worst installment in the Conjuring franchise, and that is The Devil Made Me Do It. That movie is such a nothing movie. You can go watch my review on that one as well. I did not like that one. That's not a great one. It's a very nothing movie. Nothing. Okay, let's get into my thoughts on The Nun 2. First up, some positives, okay? I really like the setting. I like the setting of both the Nun movies. It has this gothic horror atmosphere, and it's beautiful. There are beautiful scenes. Some of the shots were visually very stunning, and I loved the atmosphere and a lot of the visuals. I can't say like the tone or the pacing or anything like that, because that plays into one of my biggest criticisms of this movie. But visually and atmospherically, this movie's really good. Everything else is pretty much lackluster. I know, that's like the only thing I liked about it. Actually, there is one horror element towards the end that I liked, and I'll get into that farther into the review, because saying it right now won't make any sense. And also no spoilers in this video, because that's unnecessary. Everything else was just run-of-the-mill to me. Everything else was just okay. It was fine. I actually got a little bit bored. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if it's my attention span or the fact I'm sleep deprived chronically, that I was really sleepy watching this, and I was like, I could take a nap right now. Like, while Ryan's watching Fern, I could just go to the movie theater and take a nap. That sounds kind of nice. And I would have been able to do that had it not been for the exhausting amount of jump scares. I was so tired. And then I was just being startled over and over and over again. And has some of the worst jump scares I've ever seen in any movie. I couldn't even enjoy the horror elements to follow after these jump scares, because I was just getting over a heart attack, and I'm very sensitive to jump scares nowadays, so I'm not a fan of them. I've never been a fan of exhausting jump scares where I'm just like, okay, what's coming? Oh my god, can we get to the point, please? It just drags it out, and you know it's coming. It gets dead silent, and then boom, it's so loud, and I get overstimulated and I get startled, and that's not fun horror to me. I even tried to get in the mindset of oh, pretend you're in a haunted house, and it's an adrenaline rush. People like that. People like scares and jump scare. I don't. I couldn't get into it. And to me, it's disappointing, because these movies, it's so unnecessary to have jump scares. We don't need that many. There were at least a dozen in this movie. I'm not exaggerating. At least a dozen. And yes, it does the cliche bird flying by jump scare, which we need to retire that. Valak is scary enough without raising my heart rate. You don't need the booming sound to prove that Valak is scary to us. I can see it. Visually, Valak is enough to me. I think Valak is scary looking, but we don't need the music. We don't need the booming loud noise. And also, we don't need to see that much of him. I think we see him a little bit too much. Anyway, the Conjuring movies are, well, I don't want to say the first two, but these movies, especially the Nun ones, are just the worst when it comes to jump scares. And to me, it's getting very cheap and I'm just tired of them. So the next criticism I have for The Nun 2, it is predictable from beginning to end. You know exactly what's going to happen. It does a lot of callbacks, which every single sentence, every single point that they're making is gonna come back at some point. And you can always tell when there's gonna be a callback to detail later in the movie, when something just seems really obvious, there's just a random statement, or they focus on one thing in particular. It's gonna come back, and this does that so many times, which a lot of movies do that. That's not really a criticism, because all movies have callbacks, right? That's the point of a plot, pretty much, is you're setting up a story, and it's nice and clean and neat. It's nothing random or realistic in that sense, as far as day-to-day random things that happen that aren't important. That doesn't happen in these movies, and a lot of movies don't do that either. But I think this one in particular did it so much that by the middle of the movie, I'm like, well, yep, there's that, and that's going to come back, and everything had a purpose. Every single little thing had meaning. And to me, that takes me out of the movie a little bit, because that's not reality. I know that's a really weird criticism, because like I said, every movie pretty much does this, but I really like movies when they just show living life, you know, like if they are just going from point A to point B and there's things that happen, but they're just there. Now, I don't think The Nun 2 really offered anything new or unique to the story of Valak, or even within the Conjuring. It's just nothing really that new. There are some things like that we'll get to, but it didn't have like a really good impact or like a great impact to me. And I will say a lot of the story felt like unrealistic conveniences. Like as they're figuring out certain things, as the plot progresses, it's like they don't struggle. There's no struggle there until the climax, obviously, but there's no struggle in getting to that point, or point A to point B, or like finding out where Valak is, or like any of these things. It's just laid out for them very unrealistically and very conveniently. The scares, we're not even talking about jump scares, just the horror elements in general felt very, very repetitive. We are seeing the same silhouette of Valak, and then boom, there she is. Or he is, sorry, demon's a he, I guess. I don't know. So it's like the silhouette image of Valak and then a jump scare. And that is happening over and over and over again until at least halfway into the movie. We're getting the same scare over and over, and it just got very, very repetitive. Now, the opening scene, I will say, was pretty strong because it really set it up to be like, oh, this is going to be kind of violent. And I liked the opening scene, but then they didn't really continue that kind of horror throughout a majority of the film until like the very end and the climax. Now, speaking of the climax, that's where we get into another positive. I didn't think it was terrible. I thought it was pretty decent. I was definitely, that was the most exciting part, obviously. I was not wanting to take a nap at that point in time. We're actually introduced to a new horrific entity in this, and I liked that. I thought that was horrifying. We didn't see too much of it. It was just enough, and to me, scarier than Valak, because at this point, we've seen Valak a lot. We've seen Valak in every horror scene, in every jump scare, in every situation. And for 2 movies now, we've been looking at Valak. So to me, Valak's not as scary anymore. But the climax was still very predictable. All of it was predictable up until the very, very end. It was predictable. But the ending and the climax was definitely more entertaining than the rest of the movie. That goes without saying. That should be how every movie is, right? But a lot of the movie, like building up to that point, was just kind of like dragging a little bit. That all being said, it was better than the first one. I think it was a little bit better structured. The first one felt like nonsense to me. I don't like it at all. And the horror, obviously not good. Not good to me. I hate the ending of the first one and like how they defeat Valak. No, thank you. And so far, based on the ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, at least, critics and audiences are also agreeing with that The Nun 2 is better than the first one. So if you like the first one, you're gonna like this one, definitely, because it's definitely better. But a lot of things were just executed a lot better, but these are just not my movies. Like the type of horror that it is, you'd think would be mine, but it's not. With the jump scares and everything, it's not my movie. I'm not the one to go to the theater to like have a good jump scare, jump with the popcorn. That's not for me. Those aren't my kind of horror movies that I like to go and watch. So I'm not the audience really for the Nun movies, to be honest. Although I like the Conjuring franchise. They're not my favorite. But the first 2, great. I think those should have been the standalones. Everything after that has just been mediocre. I'm not gonna lie. Actually, I like Annabelle. Surprisingly, I like the Annabelle trilogy way more than The Nun, which is, I don't like doll movies. So that's surprising to me, but Annabelle Comes Home specifically is really, really good. I love that movie. I don't know. And I like all the Annabelle movies, actually. They're not that bad. But I feel like I gave The Nun 2 kind of an unfair chance because I don't like the first one, so I was not excited going into it. But sometimes you do that and you have really low expectations going into a movie, and then you end up really liking it because you're expecting the worst. That I was expecting the worst, and I got a little bit better than mediocre. So it wasn't as bad of an experience as The Nun, because The Nun I was really excited for and I was very, very disappointed by, but it still wasn't a great time. It wasn't a great experience. So those are my general thoughts. I know there's nothing really very specific about this video. I just don't have the energy to really put into The Nun 2. I'm sorry. To me, it's just not a good movie for me to like sit down and break down and do all of that. It's just not for me. So I would love to know your thoughts though on The Nun 2 if you've seen it yet, or your thoughts on The Nun also and its place in the Conjuring universe, and what are your favorite Conjuring movies. Now, since we're talking about them, let's bring that back again and do a little mini ranking if you want in the comments. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.